the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you everybody for joining our meeting today, June 16th. Marianne, if you could unmute yourself and proceed with our roll call.
Sure. Sorry, my dog is eating really loudly right next to me. I'm sorry. Ms. Thompson.
Present.
Ms. Siegel-Morris.
Present.
Mr. Ross.
Here.
Mr. Bria.
Present.
Mr. McCann.
Here.
Mr. Berry.
Present.
And Mr. Feiner.
Present.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. That makes 7. All members of council are present. We're also joined by the mayor this evening. Moving on to community announcements. I just have 2 quick things that I know we talked about last time, but first wanted to make a quick recognition of the fact that the Tot Lot is now open. There are some rules that we're asking folks to follow. If you're taking kids there is a sign posted outside. And also, as I'm sure everyone has noticed, that many restaurants in town are now open for outdoor dining. So we have a number of creative solutions going on there, tents in parking lots, tables on the sidewalk where they necessarily weren't before, but it seems to be working well. It's not full capacity for the businesses, but it's good that they're able to be open for some business. So to the extent that everybody is able to do so, I would ask that you patronize all of the good businesses we have in town. Before we move on, does anyone else have community announcements they'd like to share? All right, seeing none there, we will move on to the public comment portion of the meeting. So this is the portion of the meeting where residents who wish to address council may do so regarding items that do not appear on the agenda. If you wish to address council for an item that does appear on the agenda, you will be given an opportunity to do so during that item's consideration. Residents are asked to please state their name and address before beginning their public comment, and please be aware that public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per person. And first person I see with their hand raised here is Ms. Perlmutter. So I've hit the unmute button. If you unmute yourself, go right ahead. The floor is yours.
Unmuting. I just have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just saw that there's an executive session dealing with personnel. Is there any specifics you can give regarding that?
At this time, we're just going to say it's related to a personnel issue, and we do anticipate that a vote will take place after that. So there will be some discussion following the executive session for that vote. But at this time, I'm just going to leave it at personnel unless our solicitor has further comment there. But I think that's our practice.
So do you come back to this meeting or is it at the next meeting? I'm just not sure what the process is.
Right, so what we're gonna do, and this will be a little bit of an adventure for everyone because we're using new tech, is that we will be able to separate everybody on this meeting right now, where the members of council will go into one breakout room for the executive session discussion, while everybody who's listening right now will be sent into a separate room. And then when our discussion is over, everyone will come back together into the same meeting room so the vote can be held in public.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yep, thank you. Is there additional public comment this evening? I think I see Mr. Applebaum. You are still muted.
Okay. Hi, I wasn't sure this was under your community stuff or if it was under this section because I've never heard you break it out that way before. But coming this Saturday at the Farmers Market, Experience Yardley is teaming up with the Yardley Historical Association. We have had 33 plastic corrugated signs prepared with old-time photographs of buildings as they were 100 to 150 years ago. And we'll be displaying them initially at the farmers market from 7 a.m. until about 1 o'clock, where everyone who comes down to the farmers market can take a look at our display. And then afterwards, we're going to walk around town and position them in front of the buildings that they represent. So all these photographs are buildings that still stand, and you'll be able to visualize what they looked like 100 to 150 years ago. And we just want to, thank the Yardley Historical Association for working with this on this project. And we're happy to. It's something that, though it's not necessarily for economic impact or an event, but it's something to treat the residents of Yardley as we come out of this pandemic. And so that's it.
All right. Thank you very much. That sounds like a really interesting project that you've put together there. Do we have additional public comment tonight? And again, if you're on Zoom, under the participants button at the bottom is where you can find that raise hand feature, although I know it doesn't always work. So if you just wave your hand at me, hopefully I will see you. All right, and I don't see any hands of either variety. So we will move on to consideration of our consent agenda. There were only 3 items listed there today. It's approval of minutes from last time, the bills list for today, and 1 certificate of appropriateness at 7 West Afton Avenue. Would any member of council like one of these items to be considered separately? All right, since we have unanimous consent, is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda dated today, June 16th? Anyone? Motion, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, motion was made by Mr. Berry, seconded, I believe that was Mr. McCann. Is there any discussion or questions from council or the mayor? Discussions or questions from the public? All right, hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries 7-0. Next up is our Chief of Police report. Chief Kelly.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I just have one item. Late this afternoon, we received an anticipated resignation from Officer Nicholas Pilecchia. He will be sworn in tonight at the New Hope Borough meeting as a full-time police officer. He gave us almost a year of very dedicated service as a part-time officer, and he'll be missed, but we wish him the best of luck. That's the end of my report, sir.
All right, thank you, Chief. Moving on next is our engineer's report, which I know was submitted in writing beforehand, but if you have any items, Liz, you want to highlight, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Yes, hoping this will be much more brief than it has been recently. So honestly, the only thing I have to add for general updates that is not included in the report you all received previously was that I need you guys to kind of decide how you want to move forward with the phase 2 sidewalk project for Main Street. I outlined in the ongoing grant funding opportunities where we stand with grants that have already been awarded, which ones we're waiting to hear back on, and acknowledging that there are more coming in the near future. However, we have learned through this process that projects that are shovel ready fare way better in this process. And since we already have some funding secured, RVE is recommending that the borough give us the go ahead to at least move forward with the design work so that we can be a shovel ready project as we get ready to apply for the next round of grants come September.
Right, understood. And then I know sorry, I lost my train of thought for just a second. In the Public Works meeting, we did discuss that. I believe the grant applications due now September 30th. Is the next
Correct.
round. Okay, so the goal would be to have basically this work done by then is what we're looking at.
Which would be tight considering, but if we get the go ahead, I think we could get the survey team out there, get that in and push through design as quickly as possible.
Okay, that being said, any members of council want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to approve having the engineering done for the sidewalk project for phase 2. We have the money for it. It can come out of the previous grant that we got, and then we're not sure exactly how we're going to proceed funding wise for the sidewalk. We do know we are going to do the sidewalk, so I think we should just get it done and move forward with this project.
All right, so that is a motion to proceed with the engineering work. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
All right, so the motion was made by Mr. Ross, seconded by Mr. Barry. Are there any questions or discussion from council?
Just a clarification, where would phase 2 end as per the
Easement.
project? To the easement? Okay.
Correct.
Just one clarification. I don't know that saying we have the money in the current grant is accurate. So we do have, the line of credit is still open through 2022, but we are in the repayment phase of that. So we are paying anywhere between $110,000 and $150,000 each year until 2022. So that money in the sidewalk fund is kind of earmarked for that repayment, as well as monies from the general fund. So it's dependent on how much it is. We could take it out of the capital reserve account. Obviously, finishing the sidewalk is a goal, but we don't have the money in savings for that necessarily.
Well,
We also were awarded the DCD MTF grant that we applied for in 2019. That was awarded in November for $125,000.
and that will cover the cost of engineering. We did look into that already.
Okay, so it would be paid for out of this non-match grant then?
Correct.
Okay.
That's what we'd be using.
Would it be reimbursed? Like you have to pay it first and get reimbursed? Do we have the cash flow to do that?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah,
I'd just like to add that I appreciate Councilman Ross's desire to get this done. As the roads have come back to more normal traffic patterns, living on North Main Street, what has not come back to normal is there's still a lot more foot and bike traffic on North Main Street, more than I've ever seen living here since 2011. And so that underscores the need to get this done and to figure out a way to manage our finances to make it doable sooner rather than later, because it's as everyone here knows, it's not a safe place to walk, and yet people who live there need a way to walk to where they're going.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't know which way we're going to go with funding yet, but as I said, we do have that previous grant that we were awarded for $125,000, so that'll cover all the engineering. So we can get the engineering done and then submit the next grant, which we're told that if everything's ready to go, we're a shovel-ready project, that we go higher on the list of being able to be awarded that grant. So this would be the best way forward to get the most money and the highest chance of being awarded the next series of grants.
Quick question. With this grant, $125,000, and then we do the engineering work, how much does that cost? And if we don't get another grant, do we have any money to do any of the sidewalk with the remainder?
I
If
don't
we wanted to?
see much left from the 125. I think whether or not you have enough in your sidewalk fund to do some of the construction is a Carolyn question.
But not from the grant.
No.
The grant's going to cost 120, or the engineering work's going to cost 125.
It's not all the way up to that, but there would not be enough left over that it would be worth going to construction for anything. You wouldn't get with it.
And we did already apply for another grant, Ryan, that we are waiting for an answer for. And I think September 30th is around when we get an answer by.
Yep. And if we are awarded the full cost of that, that would cover a really, really large portion, because the major cost for the construction of this project is the drainage aspect, and that's what the PA Small Water and Sewer Grant was for. So that would be a huge help if we end up being awarded that.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Any last questions from council? Any questions from the public? Just make sure I don't see any there. All right. So hearing none, I will call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries 7-0. All right, thank you. Liz, do you have more under your report, or are we going to roll over to updates?
I think I have one last thing for the report, just to make sure that it's included in the record. I called into the mayor's radio show to discuss stormwater issues so that we are in compliance with our public education aspect of the MS4 permit. So I just want that noted in the meeting minutes, so I have something to submit in the annual report in September.
Thank you. And then quickly, before we move on, do any members of council just have any questions related to anything on the written engineering report? Now would be the appropriate time.
Liz, can you just give an update with the EAC project? Because I know you had a couple action items and then an item that was kind of outstanding.
Sure. The equipment order was placed. Paula put that through last week. We are working on some access letters. I actually just reached out to Bucky today to try and push that forward. EAC has already offered their members to help us with actually, getting those letters out to the people that they need to be given to. I just need to verify that we have the proper paperwork and forms to utilize for that. And then we're just continuing to work with the local water quality lab to make sure that that's set up once they start sampling, once we get the equipment installed. So we, ASA, the consultant that was hired to do the water quality aspect of this project, is hoping that we can get everything installed by the end of June.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. Anything else?
I guess one follow-up question on the Pico property, because we had thought about applying for a grant, and then I don't think we are going to apply for a grant, but is that grant able to be applied elsewhere?
Yeah, I definitely, so the grant in question is the GTRP grant, which is the Greenways Trails Recreation Program. That's the same grant that we applied to for the Mary Yardley Bridge project, and we were awarded the $40,000 for. That is for any type of open space recreation sort of thing, and it can be for land acquisition, it could be for just general planning costs, engineering and construction. It's a very open-ended type of grant. That deadline is at the end of July. So if that's something that you guys want to look into for the Reading Ave area, that's certainly an option. If maybe just for the planning, to have somebody kind of take a look at the parcel and really figure out how could it best be utilized, like that's something that this is applicable towards.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to follow up.
All right, thank you. And with that, we can roll over into these project updates.
All right. So as mentioned in the written report for Main and Afton intersection, they have done everything that they possibly can, and they're just waiting on those mast arms. And the last I was told, they expect those to be received in July. Mary Yardley Bridge replacement. We're continuing to push forward with the preliminary design and starting the permit application process. We're just about ready to submit the pre-application submittal to PADEP, where we'll have a pre-application meeting, and they'll ensure that we're getting the correct permits and where they land on all that sort of stuff. And then an updated cost was provided to council earlier today.
I didn't see that.
Matt, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. If you didn't get that, Ryan, I'll have Paul send it out to everybody.
Okay.
It came in late, probably like a couple hours before the meeting.
Oh, and can I ask one follow-up question? Not about the budget, but for the aluminum, did we get any approval for which coating we would have on? Is it an option which coating we get to choose?
Yeah, oh yeah, we did. We heard back from PHMC that they actually have been reevaluating their own stance and are moving towards that epoxy coating. So we did get an email back from Emma, and we're fine to go with that route. We do not need to do the powder coating.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
And then lastly is the Pico property. So we're still waiting to have a meeting be scheduled with Pico. But I did reach out to the grant coordinator to verify that they will only award up to 50% of the appraised value.
All right, thank you. Any final questions from council on any of the project updates?
Can you restate that? They would only award.
So basically that appraisal is binding for how much grant money they will give us. So even if Pico is requesting a price that is above that $55,000 appraised value, the DCNR land acquisition grant is only approved to be able to give up to 50% of that appraised value.
Okay, thanks.
So they use the appraised value, not the asking price.
Correct.
Okay. That could get fun, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
All right, so if there are no other questions there, we will move on to our borough manager's report. Thank you, Liz.
I did contact Pico. We're just waiting to hear back from them to set up a meeting, a face-to-face meeting to discuss the purchasing of that lot. I wanted to take a minute to thank Chief Kelly and the entire police department for efforts in handling the peaceful protests over the past 2 weeks. This was not a small undertaking. Their professionalism was noticed by many of the attendees, businesses, and residents. I also wanted to recognize Wes Fraker, Dave DeVita, Mike Italia, and council also for their efforts in getting our restaurants to have the outdoor dining. We've gotten great feedback from owners, the patrons, and residents as well. So thank you all for all your efforts on doing all that as well. And that is my report for today.
All right. Thank you, Paula. Anyone have questions on any of that or on the written manager's report that was submitted in the packet? All right, hearing none, we will move on. Mr. Klosser, solicitor's report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one item. Paula received the lease package for the post office building. Checking on a couple of things. One item that caught my eye, I'm not sure it's worthy of bringing to council's attention, but I'll mention it anyway. The lease will require that the premises be painted within 6 months of the lease term beginning. And that's January 1 of 2022. So just wanted to mention that was something that I guess could be some expense. So I just wanted to mention that. But other than that, the terms seem to be in line. And I'm going to check with Paula to make sure they're consistent with what is currently in place before we sign off on the lease.
All right, sounds good there. Council, any questions for Mr. Klosser? All right, seeing none. And actually, Ms. Perlmutter, I see your hand is up. I don't know if that was from before or for something on this issue.
It was actually in response to the borough managers. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to make a comment about the protests. They weren't completely peaceful. I do think the Yardley Borough Police did an excellent job, but there were some incidents. For example, 12-year-old girl who was wearing a Trump t-shirt had some very bad interactions with people. There was also an incident with someone spitting on someone, again, regarding a kind of a group of counter protesters. So I think that just needs to be, made public, that it went well for the amount of people, certainly, but there were counter protesters there.
All right, thank you for that comment. All right, so unless there are any final questions regarding Mr. Kloster's report, we will move on to Mayor Harding.
No report this evening. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chris. Keeping us moving along here. Next up is council member reports. So we'll just go one by one. Mr. Barry, you're up first.
Basically had the EAC report earlier. And for Reading Ave, I think we just need to decide what we want to do over the next year, whether it's seek a grant, seek partnerships, do some community events if that's possible. So we're still kind of on hold until the pandemic ends. But we can seek grants if they're available.
Understood. Does that committee have any meetings planned, even if it's just by Zoom, to maybe get some ideas, start knocking around?
I think we should meet the next planned meeting. So I'll reach out to Brian Welch. I'm not sure if he's on the call. Maybe he can weigh on when the committee would want to meet. But I think we should meet within the next month. Would be my thought. Especially if we have to decide for that July deadline if we want to apply for the grant.
Right. So yeah, I would say, coordinate with Paula. You could certainly use the Borough Zoom account to have that meeting take place. But, I think that would be a good step forward to get some of those questions answered as we move towards that grant application.
Yeah.
So, all right. Thank you. Mr. Ross.
Thanks, David. Public Works met earlier tonight, but Liz kind of took care of everything on her report and did a wonderful job. So all the current projects are moving along quite well.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ross. Ms. Siegel-Morris.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. For myself, I just want to echo what our borough manager said in thanking our police department. Particularly, I know that it has been a stressful time dealing with COVID, with the protests, and I just want to commend Chief Kelly and our officers for a job well done and dealing with the community in a way where I think everybody felt taken care of and safe during those events. But I know it's not easy. So from myself and from everyone as well, thank you. Ms. Thompson.
Yes, so Parks and Rec met last week and they have rescheduled their 2 races for the fall. The Yardley 5K will be on Sunday, October 25th at 8:30 a.m., which is the same day as the Carvathon, which I think is kind of neat. You can have a full day in Yardley. I think they're going to encourage people to come in costume. And then the Memorial Mile will be on November 8th at 3 p.m. So November is National Veterans and Military Families Month. So we thought that would still be fitting to honor the theme of that mile. And we also talked about the tot lot and monitoring that. So if anyone has any complaints or issues, make sure you let someone on council or Paula know so we can keep an eye on that. So far, it looks like it's not being used very much. And the final thing is that we didn't realize that you needed to have breakout rooms enabled before getting on the call. We have them disabled. So Paul is going to be sending out a link for the executive session, and then we'll have to come back to this room, unfortunately, unless anybody knows differently. And then I just have one discussion item that I'll bring up under discussion items.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, maybe before we break, we can talk about the tech a little bit more so we don't lose anybody. All right, thank you. Mr. McCann.
Just mentioned the Mary Yardley Bridge Committee will be looking forward to meeting soon to really discuss fundraising efforts to support that project. So that's it.
All right, thank you. And finally, Mr. Feiner.
Sorry about that. I have nothing to report.
All right, thank you. So with that, we will move on to the general discussion items. So I know, Ms. Thompson, you've got something you want here, so go for it.
Sure. So I wanted to bring up again the line of credit that was in your agenda packet for the previous meeting. We didn't get a deadline on deciding on that, but typically these offers do expire, and Newtown Bank is a local company, so we want to try to be timely in our response. So I just wanted to float two questions. The first would be, what is our comfort level with opening the line of credit on the terms that were previously provided to you, understanding that we do have to make a draw of $50,000 to open the line. And after discussing, general government would recommend that we seek this opportunity out, but only if we can delay repayment until 2022. So as I mentioned earlier, that's when our repayment of our current line of credit for the first phase of the sidewalk will conclude. We do suspect that we cannot pay for both the Mary Yardley Bridge and the second phase of the sidewalk with our current funds, even considering the capital reserve, which is at $215,000 right now. So this line of credit would be necessary if we don't secure further grant funding to do both of those in the foreseeable future. So I'm just opening the floor to any thoughts. We do need to move probably by the next meeting on this.
Yeah, and just before we go with the interest rate on the offer.
What was it?
Yeah. I know it was low. I don't know if you have the number.
1.7, I believe. Let me
Yeah, it was
pull up from last time.
1.7%. I don't know if that's changed since we got the quote, but that was.
So
what
Paula reached out to them after our last meeting, and they said that the offer remains and there's not currently a deadline. But again, we do want to be respectful of their time.
Great.
Well, what I have seen, I mean, that interest rate is lower than the rate of inflation. Plus, what I've seen is what we potentially use that for construction. If anything, that seems to go up way faster than the rate of inflation. I don't know where that industry is right now with the current situation, but I know some things are in more demand and some things are in less demand. So, but in any way, my point is, it sounds like as long as we are responsible in managing our finances, it kind of, not only is it a no-brainer, it's like net gain to actually get money at that low cost.
Correct. When we rebound our interest earnings on our savings account, so they are down right now during COVID, but if they rebound to what they were before COVID, we actually earn more on our savings account than this rate. So
yeah.
I have two questions if I can.
Mm-hmm.
The first, and I'll just say them both. The first is, you said we have to use at least $50,000 of it.
Correct. To open the line, yes.
And so where would that go? 100% definitely is the first question. And then the second question is, do we anticipate any large projects over the next 1 to 2 years after these two projects, the two big ones? So are we expecting more projects in the future, or are these really the big projects in the medium term?
Let me just pull up the packet from last time, because Paula put together a list of all of our capital projects. I don't want to miss anything. Does anybody else have that in front of you?
While you're looking for that, I think the other thing I just to kind of chime in on that is that if we have a situation that flood or something that requires FEMA, reimbursement, then is very useful to have a line of credit because of the lag time in getting that.
Yeah, so our
So
emergency
just,
funds at
good for us.
140,000, which would easily be wiped out in a matter of seconds if we flood. I don't know why my email is not finding this. Paula, do you remember what else was on there? Don't want to miss anything.
Well, there was the roof, there was the doors. There
Small
are
things.
minor items, but I was thinking besides the sidewalk and the bridge, do you foresee any other big projects maybe 2021, 2022. So
I mean,
we would
after
have to-
phase 2, we need to finish the sidewalk. The Borough Hall is in need of some serious renovation and restoration. So I'm talking nothing that we could afford without grant support or a line of credit. Like a complete new roof. It's not currently ADA accessible, so that's something that we have been looking into wanting to do. So that would be significant money, but these are short-term within the next 5 years projects, the sidewalk and the Mary Yardley Bridge that we want to complete.
Those are the two big ones.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have to use the 50,000, where do you think we would use it immediately?
So, I mean, it doesn't matter really which project we spend it on. It's going to enable us to do both. If we pay up front for the bridge and then have the Mary Yardley Bridge Committee and the other donors reimburse the borough, that would certainly be helpful for that, to be able to just have the lump sum to pay and then be reimbursed. And then what we are reimbursed could be put towards the sidewalk.
Do we need to keep 50,000 for the entire year? Is it take 50,000 to kind of activate it and then put it back in?
Yeah,
So, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that. Basically, the requirement is flows from the federal tax code. In order to establish the closing date on the borrowing, the borough would have to pull down at least $50,000, and that establishes closing date for the purposes of all the federal tax rules and that sort of thing. It doesn't have to necessarily be spent on a project on day one. It could be put into, either the reserve fund or the sidewalk fund or wherever council wanted to put it. And you would have some period of time, really a couple of years before it would have to be spent under the federal tax code. So it's more about establishing the closing under the tax rules than anything else.
But unlike a line of credit in the private sector, you can't just take 50,000 out, put it in the reserves, 3 months later, put 50,000 back and repay it. You have to keep the 50,000 on hand.
This is not a revolving line. So once it's drawn, it basically reduces the total amount that's still available.
But it's not, if we put it into reserves, it's not earmarked for use. We can do what we want with it.
Well, it'll need to be spent in the ordinance that will approve the borrowing, assuming council wants to proceed with this. We will specify what projects that the money will be spent on. So it has to be capital projects, and we'll need to specify it. Now, we can be fairly broad in that definition, but obviously Mary Yardley Bridge and the sidewalk will be a part of it. But we may want to add some other, general catch-all type of description of projects so that, if there was a need to spend money on this, that, or the other thing, you would be able to do so under the ordinance.
But once we've spent it, when we repay it, let's say we repay it faster than the minimum speed of repayment. Are we permitted to do that?
Yeah, the bank will not require any prepayment penalties or anything like that. So you can pay it back, as you see fit.
So in other words, if we allocate the first 50,000 of capital, let's say it's the bridge, whatever we do first, the sidewalk, the bridge, 50,000 goes there, and then we find the money, so we have it. We don't need that. We could just repay it, pay zero interest, and the line of credit is still active at that point.
Yes, but the available line is down 50,000 from where it started from.
I see.
Yeah. So it's not a revolving line. It's
see.
just single drawdown. Yeah.
I see. Okay. So we want to actually try to make use of it. I understand what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Thanks, Bucky.
Essentially, we're just looking to see if we spend time and resources drafting an ordinance, will it be looked upon favorably? We're probably looking at somewhere around $250,000 to $300,000.
You have to draft an ordinance for this? Or just a resolution?
I think an ordinance, right, Bucky?
Yeah, it's above, I think anything above $125,000 needs to be done by ordinance under the Debt Act of Pennsylvania.
Well, if you want my response, I mean, I think we want to do these projects. And if those are the big projects over the next year to 2 years, and we don't do well with grants or fundraising, then we can spend the next 2 to 3 years paying it back. But if we don't get grants, we're going to be in a tough. We're not going to be able to do anything else in the next 2 to 3 years. So that's.
Yeah, I don't think we can afford to hold off on all of our projects for 2 to 3 years, which is the current financial state we're in if we don't get grants or go with the line of credit.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying we have to pay it back over the next 2 to 3 years, and that's going to be.
Well, actually, no, we're going to see if we can start repayment on the principal in 2022. So we're not repaying both lines of credit at the same time.
And the line of credit does not preclude receiving grants for the same work, right? It's so, because my understanding is these sort of shovel ready, as was mentioned earlier, projects are very likely. We've had actually success getting grants before things have been that ready. We seem to be in a better position now. And then you're talking about multiple years, and the line of credit doesn't preclude receiving grants for the same work. So it seems to me what I'm kind of summarizing here is, yes, what Councilman Berry is talking about makes it is a risk, I guess, that we wouldn't get any grants and we would embark on this work and then we wouldn't be able to do anything else because all of our resources are going to that. But it seems unlikely that we wouldn't get any grants in that period of time to cover the rest of the work, from what I'm gathering. Is that correct?
That's what it sounds like. I don't think you would do the sidewalk without a grant anyway. It just
right, but we would now be comfortable applying for match grants, which we've been shying away from a bit because we don't have cash on hand.
I think one of the reasons it's taken so long to do the sidewalk, having studied this issue, and now it's been at least a decade, is that this kind of planning didn't happen in the past, where we look at a few years at a time and understand that different pieces come in at different times. It's not just a year-to-year accounting. So I think this is a good discussion to see it as 3 years or, what is that the time frame we're talking about? 3 years?
Ideally we would start repayment in 3 years. We haven't received Newtown's agreement on that piece
And when
yet,
would
but
the repayment end?
they said they would be okay for up to 10 years, but I'm not comfortable saddling 3 future councils with the debt.
No, we don't want to do that. Although I will point out that if we had done that 10 years ago, we would have been done with it by now. So
hindsight.
Yeah, that's why the thinking ahead is good. And we don't want to get into debt that we can't repay. We need to feel confident that we can repay it. But I think this has never been the issue. The issue has been the timing of the whole thing and trying to get it all paid for in compressed amounts of time.
So it sounds like there's consensus around this, that we should move forward here. So Bucky or Caroline, what are our next steps? Do we need to vote tonight to begin the drafting of that ordinance, or we need to move forward with Newtown Bank before we get to that point?
Yeah, I would suggest basically authorizing the manager, Carolyn, and me to get back to the bank and really nail down the specifics, the total amount, what the repayment dates are, and that sort of thing. And then assuming that, we're all satisfied, it'll depend on the timing, whether we can get the ordinance on the next agenda or not. But assuming that we can, I guess if we have consensus that I could advertise that for the next meeting or the meeting after that, depending on the timing, that would be helpful to have as well.
All right. So you would suggest a motion for that tonight then, or
yeah, I would go ahead and do it by motion since based on the structure of our meeting on these Zoom calls.
Yes. So, all right. So is there a motion to that effect?
Can I just have one question before we make a motion?
Yes.
So this would be for just checking with Newtown Bank and drafting an ordinance. Now, we're not in the ordinance, it's not going to say that we're pulling this money and spending it on this? Is it just saying that we're opening said line of credit, and then the decision if we're going to use the money and where the money is going to be used would be at a later date? Or is this all in one encompassing kind of ordinance?
Well, the ordinance will authorize certain the expenditure of money on certain projects. Certainly would include the sidewalk and the Mary Yardley Bridge, and perhaps some others that have been discussed tonight. It wouldn't necessarily, the drawdown of the money would occur after the fact. So council would then have to authorize the expenditure of the money somewhere down the road once the line of credit is obtained.
All right, so there's no way to like draft this ordinance or make this ordinance so we open the line of credit, and then if we drew it down, obviously I know the 50 would have to be pulled immediately, but if we could draft it in such a way so we would open the line, let's say, put the 50 in capital reserve to be held to when we decide what and if money is going to be used for what project, or down the line in the future after this would be done.
Yes, that would always be the case. So it would really be always council's prerogative to decide how to spend the money down the road.
Bucky, are you suggesting? Oh, sorry. Are you suggesting we advertise it right now, or we would draft something to be advertised?
I guess it kind of depends on the bank and how long they're willing to leave the interest rate in place. Having this ready. Is our next meeting in 2 weeks or 3? I can't remember.
3, right?
3. So it's, I guess, possible that we could have, since it's an extra week, it's possible that we could have basically a written proposal from the bank in time to have an ordinance drafted and advertised in advance of the next meeting, given that we have the extra week. So if it's council's preference that we try to move on that fast track in order to lock in this extremely low rate, then I would suggest that you grant us the authority to do that. If it turns out that the bank is willing to wait, until the second meeting in July, then, I would probably just go ahead and wait and have a draft ordinance for review at the next meeting for review and comment.
Because then it needs to be advertised in a paper for 2 weeks, right?
No, for Debt Act has its own special advertising requirements. So it's just once, but it has to be at least 3 days prior to the meeting in a newspaper.
All right.
I would make a motion to allow the solicitor and Manager Johnson to negotiate with the bank on formal loan terms and repayment terms, and if time does not permit waiting until the next meeting, that they should go ahead and draft an ordinance for our consideration at our July 7th meeting.
All right, is there a second to the motion?
Would that be also if they think it needs to happen to advertise it 3 days in advance? Would that be a part of it?
I think we would have to vote formally, specifically to advertise, right?
That's what I was wondering.
We could pre-authorize now if we need that, if waiting is not an option. Right, so if we were in a situation where we would lose the rate because of the timing, we could pre-authorize the advertising now. So the motion was made without that. So if you want to amend it, you can. If not, we'll play a round of Robert's rules.
I'm just not sure how to best word it to say that, we want to review it if possible, but if time does not permit, we authorize advertisement and drafting of the ordinance.
I would probably feel more comfortable reviewing it before it was advertised personally.
Me too.
All right, so I want to get clarification because we had a motion there and then a little bit of a discussion. So what's the motion we have on the table or that you would like to make here?
The motion is that we are instructing the solicitor and manager Johnson to work with Newtown Bank to formalize the loan terms and repayment terms, and draft, if time is of the essence, draft an ordinance for our review prior to the next meeting, but not advertised prior to the next meeting.
All right, is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
that. Hey, go ahead, Matt. Or go ahead, John.
All right, so the motion, I'll say, is made by Ms. Thompson, seconded by Mr. McCann. Is there any discussion or questions from council on the motion?
My only discussion is if time is of the essence, they're still going to draft an ordinance no matter what by the next meeting. Whether
There's
time
a
is,
cost involved with advertising, though, so there's a cost savings there. If we decide we hate it or we're not comfortable with it, we're saving some money by not advertising it before council review.
but they still will draft an ordinance proposal.
Correct.
And I guess the second question, what is the odds of the rate going down at this point? Probably pretty low. I mean, going up. Probably
Going up.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I'm fairly confident that if, nothing crazy happens, but, I hate to say that these days, that the bank will be willing to hold the rate, until council has an opportunity to review the ordinance and we have the time to formally approve it. So, but there's no guarantee, I guess. That's the only thing.
They seem extremely flexible in their communications with us.
I agree. Yeah.
All right, so we do have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any further discussion or questions from council? Discussion or questions from the public? All right, hearing and seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries 7-0. Do we have additional discussion items this evening? All right, hearing none, we're going to move on to other business. And I actually have a addition, something I want to bring up under this other business before we move into our executive session. I do apologize to members of council. I realize I emailed you a document today, which is not quite in keeping with our practice, but I thought it was something important. So I wanted to see if we could go ahead and do it anyhow. And what I sent to everyone is a proclamation that recognizes June 19th, which is this Friday, as Juneteenth Freedom Day. So what I will do is read the proclamation now, and then if someone would like to make a motion on that, we will entertain that. So it's not too long, but I will read it into the record. So this is a proclamation of the Borough of Yardley, County of Bucks, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, designating June 19th, 2020 as Juneteenth Freedom Day. Whereas Juneteenth is recognized as the oldest commemoration of Black economic liberation in the United States, whereas the last people who were slaves in Bucks County were freed from slavery in 1824, but forced into indentured servitude for decades longer. Whereas the Emancipation Proclamation issued by President Abraham Lincoln to free all people who were slaves effective January 1st, 1863, was ignored across the southern United States. On June 19th, 1865, Union soldiers arrived in Galveston, Texas, and enforced the president's order, freeing enslaved people 2.5 years after it was first decreed. This day has since become known as Juneteenth. Whereas in the years since the end of the Civil War, through systems of oppression such as sharecropping, Jim Crow laws, redlining, and mass incarceration, full equality has yet to be recognized for Black Americans. Whereas violence continues to disproportionately claim the lives of Black people in America, as witnessed by the senseless deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, and countless others as a result of these inequities. And whereas Juneteenth was recognized as a state holiday in Pennsylvania on June 19th, 2019. Now, therefore, the Yardley Borough Council does hereby proclaim June 19th, 2020, as Juneteenth Freedom Day. We recognize the historical significance of this date in an effort to promote a better understanding of the past and present experiences of Black Americans so that we may work towards dismantling systemic injustice and racism in our society. Proclaimed, adopted, and approved this 16th day of June, 2020. Would anyone like to make a motion on that proclamation?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, so that motion was made by Councilperson Thompson, seconded by Councilperson McCann. Are there any questions, discussions, comments upon the proclamation?
Just effectively, what does this do? It makes June 19th, 2020.
We're essentially recognizing the significance of the date.
Okay.
I know a lot of government bodies do this. They'll do proclamations to recognize Pride Month, or I think the county commissioners this month did a proclamation for social workers that work with youth or something to that effect. So it's just a recognition of something significant.
And I would like to add, I think as a council, we could do more of this, of recognizing different things that are significant to members of our community. I think it's a powerful step. So I appreciate it, and it was very well written, David. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments from council or the mayor? Any comments from the public? All right, hearing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, hearing none, it carries 7-0. Thank you, everyone. At this point, we do need to move into that executive session. So before we break, did we figure out the tech for how we're going to handle this? Because we are coming back for a vote, which I know slightly complicates that situation.
So we have two options. Because we don't have breakout rooms enabled, I think we disabled it during the Zoom bombing things. We can kick everyone out and they can immediately request to come back in, and we can leave them in the waiting room. Or we can click the other link that was emailed to everyone and go to a different room and then come back to this one.
All right. I think, right, it will probably work if all of the council members go into that other meeting room. In order for this one to stay open, somebody needs to stay here as the host, I think is how Zoom works.
So should we try put everybody in their room?
Well, we just need someone to basically stay in this meeting so it doesn't shut down.
Okay, well, do you want me to do that? That's fine.
Yeah, we can do it that way.
Okay.
All right.
We motion to go to executive session? If so, I'll motion to go to executive session.
All right, so we have the motion to adjourn to executive session. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, so we're gonna
stick around, Dave.
we do not need the engineers, no.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just gonna give it a minute. I think everybody is not back yet.
Okay.
Chris.
Looks like you did a great job holding down the fort pole.
Yes.
There are more
Lots of
people that
discussions.
stayed. There are more people that stayed than used to attend the meetings in their entirety in the past.
Zero. The answer is zero.
Here comes Chief. Did Chris know he had to come back?
Does. He should.
Okay.
It was the last
there he
thing.
is.
Oh, yeah.
Wait till he connects and then we'll go.
Okay.
All right, time I have is 9:12, so we are back in regular session. We are going to have a vote, and I'm going to just turn this over to Mr. Klosser to outline the motion so that we get the language on this one correct.
Yes, so if council is inclined to entertain a motion on this issue, it would be as follows. A motion to approve disciplinary action as recommended by Mayor Harding with respect to officer with badge number 7959.
Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, the motion was made by Councilmember Siegel-Morris, seconded by Councilmember Thompson. This time, council is obviously discussing executive session, but we'll follow the procedure. Is there any discussion or comments from council or the mayor? And then are there questions or comments from the public on the motion?
I have a question.
Ms. Perlmutter, yes.
What is he being disciplined for? That's pretty serious thing to put in an officer's file.
I'm again going to defer to Mr. Klosser on this one.
Well, if council approves the motion, this will really start a process for disciplinary action. There is a procedure that will be followed, so it's not the final word on the issue. But in essence, the nature of the discipline involves internal department matter. It does not involve matters with the public.
And what is the process for this? What is the entire process?
Well, again, if council approves the motion, then a formal statement of charges will be presented to the officer, and then that will trigger certain appeal rights that he would have to pursue if he so desires.
Is this one of our full-time officers?
Yes.
All right, do we have additional questions from the public on this matter? All right, hearing or seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, with that, the motion carries 7-0. And that concludes our business this evening. We just need one more motion, which would be for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion and second to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Time is 9:15. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Council, we love
Hey,
you.
everyone. Thanks for joining.
Have a good one.